have a terrific panel of corporate innovators, and Betsy Plattenburg is our moderator, and she is going to invite each of them to introduce themselves. And please be sure to talk about your background and then just tell us something that you don't think anybody could possibly know about you, so we know that you are human, just as our prior speaker said. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody to Geekend. My name is Betsy Plattenburg, and I am a member of the ATDC staff in Atlanta. My role at ATDC, and ATDC stands for the Advanced Technology Development Center. I'm going to tell you really quickly, some of you may have already listened to this, but I think it's always good to repeat. We are the state of Georgia's technology incubator for startup companies. We're located in Atlanta, but we serve companies statewide. My role at ATDC is to be a matchmaker between Global 1000 companies and technology startups. So I spend a lot of time with large corporations trying to understand their technology roadmap and problems they're trying to solve, and to find interesting, relevant startups to put in front of them. We have a great panel here today, and we're going to talk a lot about innovation, and we'll have time for questions at the end. So what I'm going to do right now is let each panelist introduce themselves, and then we'll go from there.
Thanks, Betsy. Oh, hello. You got me? All right, hi, I'm Larry Patterson. Larry. I'm Larry Patterson. I am the director of some technology groups at Gulfstream Aerospace. High performance computing and immersive realities, which is all the augmented and virtual reality. Something about me that you do not know, maybe. I'm a nuclear engineer, so that, of course, that's why I'm in IT. Tough crowd. So I was in the Navy and ran reactors for the Enterprise. Was my last gig in the nuke world. So it's good to be here.
Yeah, good morning. I'm Jim Bezner with Mitsubishi Hitachi Power Systems. So I run the plant out in Pooler, Georgia. And I've been with them a little over 2 years as the plant manager. Prior to that, I ran a wind services business out of Texas and the Dakotas. And then prior to that, spent 23 years with General Electric, working predominantly in core engineering for power generation, as well as services as well. So one thing that probably I know no one in Savannah knows, I grew up in Texas, in rural Texas, so finding a way to earn extra money as a kid, I had an opportunity to sell newspaper subscriptions. And I had to go door to door, and they had a competition with Parade magazine back when people used to actually read papers and periodicals, and was allowed to go to Denmark and Norway to meet with basically the royalty of both countries, as well as some of the politicos, as part of a Parade Young Columbus tour.
And I'm John Wallace. I run a small innovation group for Emerson Retail Solutions in Atlanta, Georgia. Retail Solutions provides products and services to the retail side of the business and supermarkets and those kind of things. And you probably never heard of us before, but if you shop at a supermarket, we keep your food cold. We make sure the climate is okay. And then we help our customers lower their energy cost and maintenance costs overall. So my background is a technical background, engineering. Grew up and around and did a lot of software and hardware development. And then over the years, I decided it was interesting because I created a number of products over the years that really didn't go anywhere. They were kind of like flops, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And one of the things that I discovered was there was this thing called customers, and the customers value things differently than I valued things as an engineer. So I kind of figured out that I needed to get out and about. So I moved more into a marketing and technical role, or marketing and product management role for a number of years, and figured out that, yeah, there's another world out there for that. And so I sort of started bridging between the technical and marketing roles. And then recently, as I think the previous speaker was talking about, we're not a huge company, but we're a pretty big company, and we realized that we needed to carve out a small group to be a little more agile, a little faster moving, and run and develop a bunch of partnerships and things like that. And so that's the innovation group. So I run the innovation group now. Actually have an innovation center that's located in the same building as Betsy is at the ATDC in Atlanta. So we're there amongst all the startups and all the really cool stuff happening in Tech Square. But I will say, I've been very impressed with what's happening here in Savannah. I got to get out of Atlanta more often because there are so many cool things happening in this area. It's just great.
So then we're going to go ahead and ask kind of each, John really gave us a head start on this, how each of you got involved in innovation. Because we go to college, you get your degree, you get your first job, and it's usually not in innovation. There's a pathway that takes you to where you are. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
All right. So as I said, I was a nuke. So first engineering degree was nuclear power and nuclear engineering, and then I went into electrical. Got out of the Navy and came to Gulfstream as an electrical engineer. Did systems there for a long time. Went up through project engineering. I got to do some really cool projects on the G4 and G4SP. We got to put infrared countermeasures on the back of the Air Force Ones, if you will, for Egypt and for Algeria. So I started doing a lot more of the engineering and kind of project side there. Moved over into the business technology or the enterprise technology division to do e-business. So for about 15 years, I've been in the technology divisions. When I got over there, I was asked by the Senior Vice President of Engineering to say I need an engineer sitting in the IT seat. So he chose me to do that. And while I was over there, I started realizing that aircraft, when you're reproducing new ones, if they call it a clean sheet, if you're going to do a clean sheet aircraft, it is a ton of design. So automotive may have a 1 year change. So maybe 1 year or 2 years is about the time that the car's out there, and now they've got to change it. For aircraft, it's more like a 7 to 10 year. On that cycle, you're going to design for 3 or 4 years before really it starts taking part. What do you do when you're trying to do that design? You have to have a lot of compute power to do it. Computational fluid dynamics that sets the shape of whatever the object is so that if it's an airplane, we want it to fly as far as it can, have zero drag. Of course, that's the goal. But Gulfstream has made its business on a lot of the superlatives. Longest flying, fastest. They're one of the best in the business, if not the best. So I realized that they needed high-end computing, and about 14 years ago, I started the high-performance computing division of Gulfstream. At that time, the scientist just says, I need something else. I didn't know what HPC was, didn't know what to go find. So we built a team to do it and started the research. So I found myself about a decade and a half ago in a very large company in Savannah. Now we're up to 16,000 people. But I found that I'm looking around going, so who's going to tell me how to do this? And realized that all of my entrepreneurial sides from businesses that I'd started and owned myself, now I'm an entrepreneur at Gulfstream, and they're saying, write the competency, figure it out. So we built a little high-performance computing business inside Gulfstream. And then recently, I've taken on augmented and virtual reality. What do you do when you don't have the plane? It's coming out in 7 years, but in 3 or 4 years, you still don't have, you don't bent metal, you don't have systems. So we are using augmented and virtual reality to do that. We'll talk a little bit more as the panel goes on, but that's what pulled me over into that, and I found myself just being allowed by Gulfstream to continue building R&D teams and continue innovating through high-performance computing and augmented and virtual reality.
All right. So again, I was sitting there thinking I'm not going to be able to match either of these guys as far as current technologists because they're into the high-end IT realm. Frankly, our plant in Pooler, we build the world's largest, most efficient gas turbines in the world. And just to give you a perspective, I want to start with that and then kind of go back through it. But we build a J-class gas turbine that puts out over 330 megawatts. When you combine that gas turbine with a steam turbine, it produces enough electricity to power the entire Savannah metro area plus some. So this just scale. It's heavy metal. Aerospace obviously and other technologies help from an IT perspective. But again, I'm a mechanical engineer by trade, so pretty much have dealt with fairly tangible things my whole life, right? And it's what got me into innovation, I would say. It's probably what got me into engineering in the first place. And having grown up on a farm in the middle of North Texas, when you have equipment and a business that you're trying to run, you pretty quickly figure out that when things break down, if you don't have the ability to tear it down, rebuild it, put it back together again, and continue with your job, you're going to be totally ineffective, right? So I would say at an early age, that's what interested me in engineering and becoming a problem solver. From there, obviously, coming out of college, going to work for General Electric, and having started in the field services arena, again, very hands-on, very practical. I rose through the leadership ranks and held roles in quality, commercial, operations, ran plants. I found myself towards the end of 23 years with the company and their engineering organization. And again, out of necessity, I was drawn in to a business that GE had acquired called Enron Wind. And it was two companies that hadn't been formally integrated, but we were struggling getting bills of material done on time. And I did find myself getting pulled into product lifecycle management and the deployment of new ERP systems as again, IT technologies kind of evolved. So it was all out of necessity, but they just needed somebody who had a process mindset to go in and look at things diligently and really map it out and figure out how to rescale as we got into going from, building 1,000 turbines a year to 8,000 turbines a year. And I would say, that was a great example, but having now transitioned into Mitsubishi Hitachi, you find out that in any role you're in, you're going to have problems that you need to solve. And so it's always competition, right? How can you make things better, faster, less expensive, but with higher quality, right? So I find myself now actually being asked to take on for their global supply chain organization for the Americas for how do we do that? How do we drive a direct material productivity out of our products so we can be more competitive with our competition? So again, I'll probably use some examples from all these experiences as we go through the panel.
So I'll just say a little bit more about some of the background, how I managed to get into the innovation role. First of all, I completely agree. As an engineer, when you come out and I think it starts in grade school. You want to solve problems. You want to do those kind of things. I think we all probably had that experience, and that was certainly my experience as well. One of the things that working, and I've worked in small companies, nothing as small as a startup, but companies with 30 people to the thousands of people. And one of the things that I've kind of noticed is the larger the company, the more attention is paid to risk management and how you mitigate and manage the risk. And it happened to us a few years ago. We had noticed, we always have very close contact with the customers now, and we sort of understand what the needs are and those kind of things. But the execution, which again the previous speaker talked a little bit about, becomes the key to that. And what we were noticing at that point was that smaller, more agile companies were coming along and were able to execute fast. They'd have an idea. They didn't have a lot of overhead in terms of the decision processes and things like that. So their risk mitigation was a lot more streamlined. And so our organization decided that we needed to address that, and the way that we address that is creating this role of carving out a role for an innovation group within the larger organization. And so I was very excited about it, took that role. And what we do now is we look for technologies, we do prototypes and developments that, with an idea of keeping the time frame very compressed. We don't want any project to go more than about 3 months or so, and we prefer it to be much shorter than that. And part of what I do is I look for partners and others to come in and help out with that. And it's something that's very enjoyable that way, but it's also, it's okay for us to fail. And I think that's part of what we kind of learn through the process itself. So I moved into the innovation, and I think we're all sort of innovators at heart that way, but it's a more formal role now in terms of how that's happening.
John, can you tell us a little bit about some of the innovative things that you're working on now?
Sure. So there are a couple things that we're doing, and I'll kind of go back and, I try not to bore you, but go back to the supermarket example, because I think that's some of I think hopefully most people are familiar with the supermarket. You shop in a supermarket. It could be a gas station, C-store, or restaurant, or whatever. But there's a lot of food that's in those places, and so we have sensing technologies that we're developing and that have been developed to allow us to sense the temperature of the food products that are in those cases. And then we have systems in the stores that record that and then look for anomalies, but we also push that data back up to our cloud where we run some analytics on it. So I kind of connect, some of the projects we run are connecting let's say the temperature of the food or what's happening in the store itself all the way back up to trying to decide if it's kept proper and things are going okay there on that side. So it's a lot about the IoT piece, which is a buzzword, and you can think what you want to about IoT, but it's how you connect that data from a location, in our case a supermarket, up to a cloud, in our case some data servers that we have, and then what you run on top of that. So I guess I'm lucky in a way because I kind of see the whole slice of that, top to bottom, and then we're able to do the analytics around the data. And the goal of it all is to help our customers as they manage their operations overall.
You want to comment on that as well?
So, yeah, as far as innovation, as far as needs for innovation, I think one of the comments or questions we had talked about earlier was what do our companies do to structure innovation? And it's really it's something I thought about. And again, coming from a large corporate world, there are companies that pretty much you develop long-term plans for like 5-year strategy plans for how you're going to grow the business and things like that. Again, in all the large companies that I've worked for, it's usually a very formal process that over 5 years they'll determine where they want to be from a market competition and a market penetration standpoint, and the profit and loss centers within the businesses will set what those goals are. And so it goes back to kind of my earlier comments around putting together process for positioning the business to succeed and the investments and the manpower to do that. So it's a pretty methodical process. So one of the books that I had actually read about it on innovation was titled Edison on Innovation, and I had read that in preparation for giving an intro for people how to develop new ideas and things when I had visited one of our China technology centers, again probably about 10-15 years ago. And one of the quotes that came out of it is evidently from Edison on innovation, and it is, innovation is 99% perspiration and 1% innovation, right? So it comes back to hard work and sweat equity and trying to develop, I think, the processes and the approach that go towards that.
Thank you, and I would add to that, at ATDC we see a lot of awesome ideas, but not everybody acts on those awesome ideas and kind of takes them from ideation through to something that's real. We, all of us up here, had the privilege yesterday of spending some time at Gulfstream, seeing firsthand some of the amazing, innovative things that they're doing, and it was really inspirational. I could talk about it, but I'm more in the wow, just amazed. So I'm going to let Larry tell you a little bit about what they're working on, because it's some really interesting things.
We can talk about a couple of things. We mentioned high performance computing. You take the technology, storage, servers, fast compute. You have to hook it together with some kind of network. I mean, in reality, it's kind of simple to say, okay, this is how the computer works. But when you get into supercomputing, the innovation comes on how do you make it run the fastest possible way, and at big scale, at heavy, we can't say how many, but heavy megawatts. It's when you get into large supercomputing and you're running CFD, you may run thousands of cores. That's another piece of it. So if you have a Broadwell right now chip, the newest from Intel, and you put it out and you put an application on it, you start running it, there's a small percentage that you normally use the CPU. For us, we use the CPUs as much as you can get out of them. And for us, if it has 32 cores on that CPU, we use every single core for a separate job. So you divide up all of your job. If you have 1,000 of them running, you divide up all of the job, send out a little bit of work to each of them, and then you put it back together. But then you write it and read it in parallel, all across the job. So all of your storage has to be parallel. Everything in it, it's general computing, but the way you do it makes it much more difficult, and you're trying to eke every little piece out of it. When I set up a data center, one of our data centers sucks down as much power, or 2.5 times the power of all of our other data centers combined, because it's straight up CPU. You may have one rack that is 54 kilowatts for a rack. So, cute. So for the compute side, once you have all the technology piece, then it's about, all right, now I've set up the tools. Once I have the tools, what do you do with it? You have to design the shape of the aircraft. You go through the loads. I have a few of my guys here, one of the guys that's in the HPC group. And you figure out, can you build that aircraft? Once you know the shape, Aero decides the shape. Once you know the shape, you have to make sure that you can put all of the hydraulics and all the systems in it. So it's always funny when you draw all of the pictures of an airplane that the engineers want to make. You have the stress and structures guys that they want to hook everything to everything, so there's no way anything would ever stress or anything would ever break. You have the aerodynamics guys, which we have one right here. You have those guys that say, I want to make, this is my plane wing. I want it this thin. Well, then the system guy says, I can't put fuel in there. I can't put systems in there. You can't do anything. Our innovation cycle for that 7 years really starts for a few years figuring out what is going to be the shape that I can put everything in. Then you start the testing. Betsy mentioned that we came out last night and looked at some of the systems. Our labs group, you start your simulation side at a computer, and you simulate as much as you can do and say, here's my engineering work. But then now let's hook a few computers together, throw some pieces, parts in there, maybe pedals, and something that's starting to be kind of like a cockpit. Now let's even spin it up more, put real systems in there. Gulfstream has spent a lot of money and a lot of attention on the lab side so that our innovation, as fast as we can design new control laws. How does it operate? When I do the flaps at this degree, or when I change some kind of control part of the airplane, what is the airplane going to do? We want, from our innovation side, we want the pilot to be able to come on, and the first time that he ever flies this test aircraft, we want him to get in it and then be able to fly it and say, I've flown this one 100 times in simulation. But this aircraft is doing exactly what I thought it would do, and it's going to give me the performance marks that I thought. On the innovation side, when you don't have that aircraft, and we'll talk a little bit throughout today, we're going to have a tech showcase for you guys for augmented and virtual reality. It'll be over in the other building. And tomorrow we're also going to do it for a few hours. There will be a panel tomorrow on augmented and virtual reality, and we'll talk more about that side. Just in general, we believe that augmented and virtual reality, virtual has been around for quite a while. We believe that the technology that is supporting it, the headgear, the HMDs, the smart glasses, we believe that all the technology is almost there. Some of it's a little heavy, some of it, the battery life may not be good enough, some of it, field of view might not be enough. But I wanted you guys, for the startups, for the investors, I wanted you to be able, if you haven't used any of the tech, I want you to be able to experience it and see the clarity on some and the field of view on some. And again, we'll talk a little more about it tomorrow. But when you don't have an aircraft, when you're designing it, how do you walk in and say, okay, I want my couch over here, or I want to change this, and what the air conditioning parts up here, how do I shape that? Because I'm standing in a 6-foot aircraft, how do I keep from bumping my head? What is the best way to design it? And then the designers will say, I want it to be modern. I want it to have that wow factor. And then you say, well, the thing will be flying for 50 years as well. How do I keep it classic? How do I keep it to where it's not a fad that's going to come in and out? All of those designers need somewhere to design. They're not going to design in a CAD package because the plane is not being drawn yet. It's not in CATIA. It's not in the CAD. So you have to draw it. You have to figure it out. We are using augmented and virtual reality to put it into realism so that you can actually walk into your aircraft. You can put the headset on and be fully immersed sitting in your aircraft, looking at the designs, walking through them before that we ever cut the first piece of metal, before we ever build the first cabinets.
Thank you. We're going to change gears just a little bit here. I spend my days trying to be a matchmaker between startups and large companies, and I know for those of you who work in startups, sometimes it can be a mystery how you get in and how you might work successfully with a large company. And sometimes startups have some really cool things that they're working on, and they could potentially be of interest to a large company, but kind of bridging that gap can be hard. So I'm going to throw a question to John about, working with startups, and could you give us an example of a successful experience you've had, or sort of the process that you go through in working with a startup?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I kind of view too is there's a large part of connectedness that's involved in an innovation job. It's kind of like connectors all over the place. And I know Betsy has kind of helped me as we've established our office there in the building at Tech Square, to help me understand who's there and those kind of things. And I really just enjoy kind of going down and walking the halls of the ATDC that's there, because it's always changing. There's always new companies coming in, new technologies and those kind of things. But you have to understand what your need is, or what problem you're really trying to solve from my perspective. And ultimately, it's my customers that have a need. So I have to sort of bridge and connect in a virtual way between our customers, which would be the people that own the chains, the supermarkets, those kind of things, and what their needs really are, and then go and look for those technologies that might help address those needs. And so it starts with a need. You understand that. You have to have a pretty decent understanding around that. And then once you do that, you can go and find those companies that are involved in a technology that may help address that. Maybe not always 100%, but maybe pretty close to that. And then you start building and establishing a relationship. I'm a big believer in building and establishing relationships, and those can take time. I started actually a couple years ago. I found a company at a trade show that was doing something. We knew we had a gap in our technology. They were doing something very similar, and it took us 2 years to kind of partner and build a relationship, and that ended with an acquisition just a little bit earlier this year. But it takes time to build those relationships and pull that back in. Now, the more recent example is one of the, I don't know if you'd still consider it as startups, but one of the companies that I think came out of the ATDC, and Margaret's going to talk, I think, tomorrow. So we worked, Margaret was helping me several times. She has I guess it's augmented reality, I think. I'm using the terms right there. I always get confused a little bit. But anyway, an augmented reality company. We haven't been developing that technology internally, and once I saw some of the things that she was able to do on one of our tours that the organization was kind enough to arrange for the companies, the innovation centers that are there, the wheels started turning and kind of clicked on a few needs that we have and how we connect that back through. So we're doing a pilot, a prototype right now to help us. We provided the information, and then her company is kind of building that for us. But it's a lot about the needs that we're trying to solve. And we could, as a larger company, sure, we could do something like that ourselves, but we don't have the expertise. We'd have to bring the expertise in. And again, going back to this risk mitigation piece, we would have to think about, is that really in our best interest to be deploying resources to do those kind of things? So that's part of the thought process that goes around how you're working with or how we work with startups. I'm not saying that's universal, but how we would work with startups. The one thing I have found too that I try to be very careful about is it's very easy for a larger company, myself, to walk in and start trying to bend what a particular smaller company is working on, the startup. And I think that's a trap you can fall into. And I try to be very careful about, if there's no alignment, I'm not going to try to ask a smaller company to to bend to do what I need them to do unless it's in their best interest for. So I think, again, I'll kind of summarize, it's about establishing a need, having a process to find the companies that are doing some of those technology developments that is a gap for your company, and then establishing the relationship and then working on sort of a mutually agreeable and mutually beneficial relationship between the companies that way. And it can be difficult if you're not very careful, because sometimes a larger company is set in their ways, and I think you got to be very careful about making sure that you're open to new ideas and how you work with those smaller companies that way.
For us in the augmented and virtual reality arena, we don't look mostly for fresh startups, but our team, we are looking to partner with the guys that's been out there 2 or 3 years and really gone after one specific thing and becomes the best of it. So we like working with those smaller companies. So everything around the game engines for Unreal or Unity, all the programming for those, anything that you're delivering to the devices, we are interested in working with startups on those. We work with companies that are, 30 people or less, quite a few of them. So.
Thank you. And one thing I wanted to add from my perspective, we've seen at ATDC the greatest success for startups working with large companies. If there's somebody within the large company that basically becomes their shepherd and takes them through the process, because at large companies, and I think you all would agree, there are a lot of systems and process, and it's difficult. You can't just walk in the door and tell somebody your awesome idea, even if it's an exact match, and expect to get under contract or have something happen rapidly. There's just a lot of hoops that you all have to jump through. So if you find somebody who can basically be your internal advocate and assistant, it makes a big difference, but it is a hard thing to do. Is there anything else that anybody on the panel wants to add about, just as we've listened to different people talk about innovation, that you want to add, and then we'll go to questions in a little bit from the audience.
So I was going to just add, kind of on the last topic, as far as kind of underscore a comment that he made, because again, I don't know how many startups are out there, but when you're dealing with a large corporation, again, developing the need, it's all about risk mitigation in their eyes, right? So, in trying to, you got to keep ethics and integrity at the foundation of your companies. You've got to really watch a lot of the details around how the company behaves, right? And some people may not think about, environmental health and safety, or of course, I know there's a large group of IT people in here around security and things like that. So I think it's, once you develop the need and it's well defined, and you figure out that your solution is a solid one for a larger company, you got to really think through, if you put yourself in a large corporation's view of what kind of risk potentially could your company bring to that company, and then try to mitigate and be prepared before you get involved in the process deeply.
That's great, thank you. And we thought we'd see if there are any questions from the audience. I know we've talked about a wide number of things, so feel free to think. Margaret.
I have a loud voice. I'm just curious, you guys talked a lot about augmented and virtual reality. Are there, what other innovative technologies are you looking at, or are you interested in? And, what do you see as the kind of next technologies that you'll be looking at? And is it more like around security or artificial intelligence, or just, what are your thoughts around that?
So I'll start out on that. I think there's so many different areas that are out there. Sometimes I'm like a kid in a candy shop when I'm kind of looking around at all this stuff, because I don't know anything about a lot of things, but I know a little bit about many things that way. And one of the things that I see that I think has tremendous potential, and I feel like I'm kind of late to the game recognizing this, but it's in the areas of machine learning and some of the things that are happening there. And I've been doing software hardware for years, and I programmed PID controllers, PID loops, all that other good stuff, and there's all sorts of tuning algorithms and things around that. But I think machine learning has certainly the potential, and it's already changing the way a lot of those more traditional things were done. To the point where, I'm trying to learn a lot more about it myself right now, and I'm not a data scientist. That was never my career or involved in it. but I recognize how important and integral that area is to helping companies and really helping deliver products. And we think, I think it can change everything from the way we do our, let's say, our cloud optimizations, all the way down to the way that your food is being controlled and the temperatures are being maintained in the supermarket. It just really, in my opinion, changes the game there. And I've had a lot of discussions with some of the professors at Georgia Tech on kind of where is it going in the future. And I think my vision, could be wrong, but or at least my understanding, let's put it that way, is that it started as a kind of up in the cloud analyzing data, but really some of the more forward-thinking people now are sort of pushing that down to the edge devices. So a lot of the newer algorithms are built to run on more of the edge devices and not necessarily in the cloud. So I think there's some connection there that'll go away. So, or that will continue going. So for me, machine learning is one of the big areas for me.
Our big one, machine learning over the next few years. Everybody likes to use big data. Everybody likes to use the punch words, Internet of Things, and we do. And in that business, Internet of Things, yes, it is perfect for Gulfstream. It comes at data analytics, but just because you have a lot of data, that's not a big data problem. So, and we have lots of data, petabytes of data, but that doesn't necessarily mean that now you have to try to attack that. Machine learning from the GPU side and from the CPU side on analytics on the data, and for Gulfstream, probably around our customers and customer relationship. That's going to be one, and around HR analytics probably will be the next two, but they're kind of the next one that we'll be looking at after AR and VR.
Okay, well, I want to follow the process. Well, a bit loaded question. I myself come from corporate Fortune 500 companies, and here's the reality. If you look at Fortune 500 companies, 50s, 60s, 80s, and right now we are in the 21st century, the rate of failure of Fortune 500 companies is increasing. And most of this is driven by innovation, that corporations don't see changing environment, innovation, and behind the curve. So a very loaded question for you gentlemen is, what would have to happen in the innovation space that could put you out of business?
Yeah. People stop buying food would be a real problem, so. No, I think it really is a good question. I think it forces you to think about it, and it is one of those, when you're inside a larger corporation, sometimes you're a little bit insulated from some of those kind of things, and I think that is a huge danger. And I can't and will not talk specifics, but I think some of the things that we've been talking about is we generate value for our customers by helping them save energy, save maintenance, save on their maintenance dollars, and making sure that their foods are kept properly. All the way from, not quite to the farm, but pretty close to the farm, all the way to when you pick it up on the shelf. So there's a lot of innovations around that whole supply chain that we're really looking at, because it's ripe for changes. For 100 years, not 100 years, for many years it's been done the same way, and now things are happening either from the environmental side. We talked a little bit about the green side. There are changes, some regulatory changes that are happening around, and I know this is probably a boring topic for most people, but around the refrigerants that can be used in your supermarkets and your air conditioning systems. And regulatory changes is one of those, the Porter 5 Forces is one of the drivers for that you have to watch. And I think you have to be careful about, as a bigger company, you have to be careful about, say, more agile companies coming in and sort of grabbing that piece and running with that side. So again, it's about not being inside so much. And I love one of the first speakers, he talked about get out of your office, and I think that was just a great thing for big companies and small companies too. Get out of your office and see what's happening, so you don't get trapped in that hey, nothing's going to happen to me scenario. So.
I'll give you a couple. So, planes that fly themselves. Yeah, that bone was for you, Chris. Because we believe that it really could happen. Of course, the FAA would never allow that. But let's even think out farther. I've got plants all over the audience, and they're throwing me answers. So here's the good one: teleportation. Then they don't need us anymore. So if you're investing in teleportation, and that one's for you. So there you go. So then maybe they won't need business aircraft, and that just means if that is turn the video off because I just got fired.
So I'm not going to throw out specifics again about the current company that I work for, but I will say, I mean, you and I spoke earlier and have worked for some of the similar large corporations, right? And I would say as a general rule, it's complacency, right? And if you've ever worked in a large successful organization that's been number one, number two, or number three in their industry, right? And you just look back at, I'm sitting here watching a guy, videoing us right now, right? What's the probability that he's got film in that camera, right? And it just, Kodak, right, would be a prime example. So it's complacency, number one. When you are in a company and you think you're really good, you're number one, and there's nobody that could take that position from you, that's when you need to start worrying about it and thinking about it.
Blockbuster video.
Yeah, blockbuster video. I mean, there's a lot of them. So it's complacency, number one. And I think from a company standpoint, once you're beyond the startup stage, right, and you're growing and trying to scale, you've got to make that part of your corporate culture, right, to again, going through these annual planning processes and looking out whether it be 5 or 10 years and trying to think about what is it that keeps you up at night, right? And when you look at successful company and the leadership, they're never happy, right? They're always worried about what their competition's doing. And so I think keeping your eye on your competition and understanding where they are, being realistic about where your position is in the market and what you have to do to be more competitive. And I think that, again, it's discipline. And so, those are the two things I would just say, that complacency and lack of discipline in companies of putting that as part of your business planning process, it will doom a company fundamentally.
I want one more before I hand Betsy the close. I just wanted to say, from the board of directors from the Creative Coast, I wanted to welcome all of you guys, and we are so glad to host, and we're glad that you have attended and you're coming to Geekend. So we hope this will be a good experience for you.
Thank you. I want to add one quick story too. We worked recently with a Fortune 500 company that tried to launch a new product, and it failed miserably. And in a discussion, we were talking about, well, what kind of customer discovery did you do? And they said, oh, well, we talked to lots of people, and they were all so enthusiastic. They loved it. And then we poked a little bit deeper, and all their customer discovery they did with people that worked within their company. Every single person loved the idea. They thought it was awesome. But the problem is they actually never talked to anybody outside the company. Yeah, I mean, it's funny, right? But that's literally what they did, and they invested and lost a big chunk of money, and were mystified at the time as to why that happened.
We have 15 more minutes for Q&A.
Great.
So.
Anyone else? Here in the blue shirt?
Mark Brimmer, CEO of Excess Capacity. We are an online marketplace platform for businesses trading idle or underutilized resources. Gentlemen, you're working in fortunate to be working in some very innovative technologies within your respective large companies. For John, for you, it's IoT, cloud computing, machine learning, as you mentioned. For Jim, it's process-oriented ERP, MRP systems, getting vendors onto the platform, being more productive that way. For Larry, it may be grid computing, quantum computing, that might be something in the future that will enable those processes to be faster. In what's termed the sharing economy, there are examples of disruptors. For example, Uber, Lyft in transportation, Airbnb in hospitality. Are there examples in your companies where you are applying resource utilization or collaborative consumption?
So again, working for a Japanese company, right, that had decided, say, 13 years ago to really get into the Americas. I'll tell you, man, we have collaboration is kind of our middle name, to be honest. So we spend a great deal of time collaborating with our parent company in Japan, right? Anywhere from 13 to 14 hours difference, very difference in culture. Very, very challenging, right, when we're trying to collaborate with other plants. And I will say that, I mean, I can't take credit. They have a mindset of collaboration between the plants. And just as an example, right, again, I'm a manufacturing guy, so I make stuff, right? We will always look at best practices across the plants. And they have basically a biannual rhythm of getting the leadership from engineering as well as manufacturing together. They have a structure for how they can measure productivity, as an example. I am proud to say our plant here in Pooler won their productivity award globally out of all the Mitsubishi Hitachi plants, and we're the first plant outside of Japan to have won that award. So we did it, just using fundamental Lean Six Sigma principles of eliminating waste and rework, right? So I'm very process oriented, and I could talk for hours and hours about Lean and how it's applied correctly in a manufacturing process. But I think really understanding the cultures within a company, especially if you're dealing with people outside of the United States, is extremely important. And then again, just trying to develop a framework for how often do you communicate, how do you share best practices, and then how do you baseline and how do you measure yourself relative to each other. And I would give accolades to the company that I work for doing that, and for having been able to be successful moving, outside of the eastern part of the world as we see it now.
Anyone else? Right here.
Hi. So you guys all seem to be very enlightened from the standpoint of working for a corporation and being supportive of startups at the same time and collaborating. What advice would you give to startups who may be a little wary of approaching a corporation with their idea or process and product that they feel like they want to be protective of and not have a big company come in and eat their lunch?
That's a perfect question, right, Chris? Just this week, we had found a pretty good augmented reality company, another group with other devices. We know that we are doing NDAs with them. We know that we are going to be moving forward on specific things. But as we started looking at the market over the last year, we believe that each of these two, not exactly startups, but 3-4 year and small dozens of people, we thought they were the best. So we approached them and said, you guys need to talk as well. And they're going, are you kidding me? What value could I gain from that? I'm like, look, it's not your niche. You guys, they've actually invited us to their board meeting so that we could hear their strategy, and we really knew their roadmap. And I'm like, these aren't going to compete, and they're the left and the right hand. So we tied them together. That's one example of NDAs to where now we're going to do a 3-way NDA between us for the stuff that we're working on, and then they're going to do one off to the side because they'll probably end up working together. I want startups like that. I want the 2-year, 3-year that's got a niche that first that startup needs to know, are we working on the technology? So here you've heard a few of the technologies we are. So if it's augmented and virtual reality, I want them knocking on my door and saying, this is my piece. It's not, everybody's putting content in a device. Some of them are making better devices. Okay, I want to watch them all. But I want someone to lead something, and I don't want them to be an all-trick pony. They're going, well, I do this really well, and I really didn't want to get into this part of it, the software side, or I didn't really want to get into I'm like, great, you guys talk. I would love to have numerous of those startups that are doing that piece, and let's put the pie together. Let's brand together. Let's share intellectual properties. you shouldn't be scared of the big bad wolf. Yes, 16,000 employees, General Dynamics owned for Gulfstream. But again, half the staff is here. We want to build the culture of startup, the culture of entrepreneurship. We want to embed it into our culture at Gulfstream. That's why we believe things like this is so important. We want to reach out to the startups. I wish the startups knew more about what we're doing and what we're looking for, because I don't care where it's from, and if I can help a smaller company, I'm probably going to do it. And if they have a niche that no one else, great. Let's build it and let it run faster. And then we'll contact people like sitting over here and other investors that are in the back, and we'll say, let's pump it in.
Add something real quickly. I've facilitated more than 200 meetings between large corporations and startups. We don't sign NDAs in those meetings. They may sign NDAs later, but the reason we do it is we want to get exposure for startups for 15 or 20 minutes in front of folks like the team up here to see if there's any synergy. And we always ask people to tell the visitor and tell you who you are, what you do, how you could envision working with them. We're trying to get you a second date, and we have a pretty good track record with that. And I think that, yeah, there are concerns, but as somebody who has watched startup after startup do this, I think the benefits, from my perspective, far outweigh the risk.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. If you come to me and say, I need you to sign an NDA before I'll even talk to you, it's not going to happen. It's really not worth it for me to do that. If you come to me, and I'd love to have a conversation, and Betsy has actually facilitated a number of those, I don't want you to tell me what your secret sauce is. You know, that's what you have to keep that. But I want you to be able to show me how your secret sauce can help me as I combine it with my domain knowledge to leverage and deliver a solution. So that's one point. The other point I would make is it is so much easier for me as a big company to engage with you as a smaller company if you have taken steps to protect your secret sauce through one means or other. Trade secrets or intellectual property patent filings. That's actually one of the things that we sort of look at and tick off. I know patents can be expensive, but honestly, there's a reason they do it, because it protects you, but it also protects me too, because now I know that you're serious about it. I know that you have some information there. It doesn't have to be granted, but the fact that you've taken that step really helps me to understand how to engage.
So that was the comment I was going to make. Bottom line is you need to determine what it is you do that's different than the market and get the appropriate, I think, IP or protection around the technology first, if you're serious.
Say one more thing about the NDA, and I totally agree. As we were talking to them, I said, would you guys like to do an NDA? And everyone's, they're skittish, because once that's down, you're really talking secrets. And one of them said, let's just talk first. It took us a while to get them there. It was funny, in a 1-hour meeting, the last 30 minutes, they're sharing more secrets than anything, and they still hadn't signed one, because now they're going, okay, let's sign an NDA and let's start working on product.
Anyone else? Oops.
We have time for one more question, I'd say.
As a group of fellow engineers, I'm sure you're familiar with Putt's Law. For those of you who don't know, Archibald Putz wrote a series of articles in the 70s about engineering, and in those he said, technology is dominated by those who manage what they do not understand and those who understand what they do not manage. And having worked in the corporate world for 25 years, I've seen many examples of that, where meeting with the CEO of the corporation, he has no idea what I managed or what I did, but yet he's in charge. And that's been a real drag on innovation in corporations. Do you think that's changing now? Do you see the CEOs and corporate management becoming more in tune with innovation in some of these areas?
I'd say absolutely. If you don't, you're not going to be in business, right, long term. So, personally, I think there's a I'm going to use the word pervasive kind of tone in current culture, right? That big companies are bad, which I think are crazy, because if you've ever worked with truly the senior leadership, the CEO of a company, those are some of the hardest working people. I mean, they're fully applied all the time. They're thought leaders, and I don't know. I don't know that I would subscribe to the Putz law that you mentioned.
I have to say, and I mean, this is not the show for the camera, but we're blessed. General Dynamics owns us. General Dynamics is divested quite a bit, so there is money for R&D. In the aviation industry, there's very few competitors that are doing multiple clean sheets every few years and doing new planes. They do some kind of rev to an avionics package and say, okay, this is a .1. For us, we put out the 650, the 500, the 600. We just keep rolling out clean sheets because we are innovative. We are looking at that next line. And while there's downturns in the market, they still give us R&D money to do this. And I'm blessed. My job is because that they allow that. Do I know that they know all of the things that we're doing? All they know is that they are getting the innovations out of it, and they keep giving me the paycheck.
Betsy, the last word.
Thank you, everybody here in the audience, and to my panelists up on the stage. We really appreciate you all taking the time to listen, and the folks up here taking the time to share. So if you have additional questions, feel free to catch us after the presentation. Thank you.
And